Okay, so let's look at Chapter 6. Topic area in Chapter 6 is integrating complex business functions, integrating complex functions into business analysis. So some of the topics we talk about in this is, basically the idea of being able to take data and convert it into information. That's really one of the primary purposes of Excel. That's what we use it for. And part of that is being able to, take something big and reduce it down. So the idea of being able to do a reduction. There's a number of different ways we can do this. Uh, One way we do it is something we call using filters. And we've talked a little bit about filters before, but in this chapter we're going to go into it a little bit more. Um, and in addition to filters, we also have subtotals. What subtotals are is um, basically providing roll-ups at different levels of at different breakpoints in a set of data. So you just go through sort data by a certain attribute, go through add up everything up to a certain point. So like a sales region, all right, or a month, or a state. So things like that. All right. So that's kind of what subtotal is. Also going to talk about different kinds of what we call database functions. Some the stuff that we've put into that's been added to Excel that kind of gives it a database-ish capability. We're going to talk about pivot tables, and then finally we're going to wrap up talking about pivot charts. Okay, so our starting point, and we talked about this at the beginning of the class, so this is kind of a real quick review. There's a hierarchy when we're talking about data and information and knowledge and wisdom. I mean, there's a hierarchy. At the lowest level we have data, what we call raw data, elements, facts, recordings, measurements of different types. Some stuff is digital. Things can either be digital or non-digital. In our case, what we talk about, what we work with Excel, is all digital data, digital representations of data. All right. And what we do is we take that digital data and we apply context to it, or we add structure to it. All right, and in doing so, we turn that data into information. All right, so information is data that has context, meaning, and relevance. All right. If we combine things together, if we do collections of of information, we can call this stuff a data set. All right, so data sets are, we would define that as being collections of related information. All right, and this is kind of what we do with databases. All right, but one of the things that's happened is within Excel, there was a desire to kind of provide that type of capability in Excel. So what was been added to Excel is something we call an Excel table. All right, so we can um, take a chunk of data, or what we would set up, in rows and columns in an Excel worksheet, and turn that into what we call a table. All right, so it gives it a name, a named range, which can be extended and manipulated. All right, so and it also gives us by creating this table, we can actually, it is defining a structure that we can actually use in a formula too. All right, so we can, there's a lot of advantages of using tables inside of Excel. So let's look a little bit at, we talk about an Excel table, organize it, and really what it is, it's the data that we have in a worksheet, organized in a particular fashion. Right? So we take that data and we do some stuff to it, right? So we'll add like banded rows, which will give us, improved readability of data of the worksheet. We can add filters for the columns, so we can sort and filter the columns in a table. We can incorporate the name. So by default, usually what we will see is in a worksheet, the top row will have the column heading. All right, but that's just simply a name. All right. And if we scroll the worksheet up and down, that'll go away unless we lock that row. What will happen is when we create a table, those column names are always visible. All right. And then finally, we can add totals and aggregate functions within each column. All right. So we can do a lot of, this idea of a table in Excel is really it takes your traditional, worksheet and allows us to change, kind of add capabilities to make it easier to work with and be able to review and, manipulate the data, right? So, the example we would have here, working with data and information in tables, let's make it a little bit bigger. So, this is, we have subtotals, we can add totals to it. We have formats we can apply. We can, we can break these things into totals. There's characteristics on this one. Table column headers, replace the letter heading. So usually what will happen is in a regular worksheet, the headers are just, it's just another row of data. Whereas in a table, the table column headings are, that replaces it and actually gives us the ability to do to work with. All right. So let's take a quick gander at what one of these things will look like. All right. So if we do we take a working table. All right. I'll just take this one right here. All right. This is a fairly simple one. We'll come back and revisit this at other points. But this is a representation, real simple table of, a quarterly breakdown for coffee, tea, and milk. All right. So the idea being that, you have an organization, an operation, and has, that you're selling stuff. You're selling, these products over this time period. Okay. And this is just and what this is right here, this is simply an Excel sheet. This is, a traditional, what we've been working with to date. Okay. Now what we can do is we can format this as a table. All right. So where the work we do this in, all right, is actually we can do this on the home table, on our home ribbon here. And I come over here and I can say format as table. All right. And we can select, all these different types of representations of tables, different colors, different styles. What I'll do is I'll kind of select the space here, kind of select this data, because this is just data right here. And I'm going to say format it as a table, and it's going to create a table in effect. Let's make it orange. All right. And what it'll do is ask us where's the data in our table, is A1 through E4. All right. And what we also say is the table has headers. So the first row of this table is the first row, it contains the descriptive information. All right. So it contains the quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. If I click an OK on that, what you'll see is it converted that data that was on our worksheet into a table. Okay. Now a table is an object. Right? We've talked about objects inside of Excel. An object is a type. Is a programming type, or a type of either a code or something executable that Excel will recognize and give us, has different properties we can work with. Okay, so in this case, what we'll see is this is now a table. Okay, and we can see if I look at our names, we now have a table. Table's called table 1. All right. And I can call that table. Now, the way you get to a table, the way you work with a table, if I just click this, if I'm in any cell right now in this, on on this worksheet. If I want to be able to work with the table, all I do is I just click into that table. All right. And what it will do is, as I'm moving into a cell in that table, it will automatically detect that this is a table. All right. And what it will do is it will pop up this table entry. It'll add this in the ribbon and give us all these different capabilities. All right. So we can do a whole bunch of stuff within this. Okay. So we know we can do things like we have a header row. I can create a total row. Give me a grand total. I can do banded columns if I'm inclined to do banded columns. We have a filter. We've applied a filter. So what it does is it'll automatically apply filters. So it'll change the format, and it'll automatically apply the filters. And then we can do other stuff to this within the table. So we can insert what we would call a slicer. All right. So a slicer is another object that we can add into our worksheet. So it's a slicer object. So if I insert a slicer, all right, what I'm going to do is I can pick the column I want to add slicers for. So I can actually do a couple slicers. I'll do a quarter. I'll add 4 slices, or actually in this case 5 slicers. And what it does is it allows us, it's kind of a pictorial representation of filtering. Okay, so I can come in here and I can go to a filter, and I can select all, or I can select the coffee, tea, or milk. All right, that's one way I can work with filters. Slicers are really another implementation of a filter. All right, so what it will do is it will look at the table, what I have defined in the table, and it'll create an object. It'll go through and create an object which will have all of the the contents of it, which I can then use as I can then go through and really kind of activate the filter. So for example, on coffee, on column 1, if I don't want to see milk, if I only want to see milk, I can select milk, and coffee and tea will go away. And if I select coffee, I'll get just coffee. If I want to see tea, I'll just get tea. I can clear it, and I'll get the table back. So once again, this is, as we've talked about with Excel, one of the things about Excel that you always want to keep in mind is we have our data, and then we have the representation of the data. All right, so the data is still here. All right, when I apply a filter, all I'm doing is I'm making it, I'm basically hiding it, so it'll be able to selectively separate that. So what a slicer is really a kind of a visual tool that lets us apply the apply filter, or activate the filters in our worksheet. As you can see, as I'm clicking these, it's activating the filter. Right, so that's all that is. Right? It's a pretty slick little tool, and it gives us the ability to, it gives, we have our basic filter, but now we have a more sophisticated filter, okay, or a more sophisticated application of a filter. All right. So that's our table. That's our table here. So as I said, this will give us, and what will happen is we can use the table name in in formulas. All right, so it's a structure. It's and we can use that as instead of the name, instead of putting the cell names in, the cell range. So this would be A10 to whatever is that, I whatever, however the length that is. I create the table. All I need to do is I can put the table name in there. So it makes our formulas a lot more readable. We can get a better understanding of the we can get a better understanding of the data, of working with things. It simplifies the structure of our formulas. All right. So we can do that's kind of our what we need to do to set up a table. So it's very simple. It's a very simple kind of exercise. All right. We can do tables, and if you look at on Excel, a couple different places we can do tables. All right. So we can do tables here. We can select a range of data, or just click format as table, a range of data as table. All right. Or we can also get it to it through the insert. So we can insert a table. All right. So what I did was I actually converted that in place. I simply gave it that range, and it took that range of data and turned that into a table. All right. So, but I can also do the same thing here. All right. Where is the data in your table? So it's pretty simple. Very simple to set up. Very quick and simple to work with. All right. But then we can also, there's things we can do within tables. So there's a function that is in Excel called the subtotal function. All right. Now, subtotal function, at first glance, you look at it and you say, okay, it's a subtotal. It'll let me create a roll data up and create be able to roll data up into different levels. Okay. Now, what happens is the actual, but there's actually the execution of the function. The execution of the function is a little bit more sophisticated. So we can do, we can call in different functions within this subtotal, all right, of different types. All right, so we can do a sum, or we can do an average. All of our statistical things we can do. That's what this first argument is in this table, or excuse me, in this function call for the subtotal. All right. So the name itself does not really. It's not the best name in the world, because actually what happens is you can do a subtotal. A subtotal is not just a subtotal. It's actually has a lot more capabilities and a lot more functions built into it. Okay. But we'll use, it's kind of as we go through here, we'll take a look at the list. So this right here is the list of all of the different functions and filters that get built into that really get built into the subtotal function. So what we can do is we can either we have by depending upon the parameters, we can do sums, we can do average, counts, sum, standard deviation, max, min. So all of our, these all look familiar. These are our standard, statistical functions. All right. But if we if we say, okay, if we enter a 1, that's what we do sum. So if we want to do a sum, we would use 9. Okay. And what that would do is if I apply the filter, I'll hide values. All right. And what it will do though is it will not. It'll include all the data that's in the table, whether it's hidden or not. If I have applied a filter to it or not. If I call the subtotal and I give it 109, 109. All right. What that will do, what a 109 will do is it will only calculate the numbers that appear on the screen. So if I have if I apply a filter and it hides a bunch of stuff, if I do a sum, I hide everything, it will do the calculation only upon what is presenting. So it's a little, this one's a little bit more sophisticated than your basic run of the mill function. So it's a little, it's a little, uh, I guess misleading might be the right word. But it's a very power. But once again, it's a very powerful function as well. All right. So like in the case here, what we can do is I can say if I create a table and I put a function, I can do equal subtotal for, I guess this would be an average. All right. And this would be the table. I can give it the table name as opposed to a range. I can give it a range of cells, but I can also give it the table name. All right. So, so the idea of what the filter enables us to do and what the subtotal lets us do, we do have the ability as we're applying filters and we're working with filtering, we can we can set it up so the data will change depending upon whether we apply a filter, whether it will dynamically recalculate based upon the information it takes away off the screen, because sometimes or off the worksheet, because sometimes if you say, okay, I'm going to apply a filter and you have a total and the total doesn't change, well, then you have to kind of explain why that would be. All right, so once again, it's features and functions that are within the that we can apply to a table, and allows us to be able to generate create aggregations of different at different levels within a data set. Like I said, that would be a data reduction. We're reducing the size of the data set, by adding things up and summing things up, and it's becoming less granular. All right, so we say very fine grain would be individual records, and then what happens is we add a whole bunch of stuff up, and it becomes the term we use sometimes is coarse grained. All right, so if I add 25 numbers together and have a sum, that is, fine grain would be the 25 individual numbers. The coarse grain would be the sum of those 25 numbers. All right. So as we're talking about our applications of the filters, depending upon the subtotal type that we apply, on the filters, either we would show as we would hide data based upon what we would apply the filter for. The totals, the subtotals, would either align, follow along with the application of the filter, or well, so it's our call here. All right. And then we can adjust the auto filter. So there's things we can do, with the filter. So if we take a look at the filter, we look at a filter here. Actually, we'll clear these, clear filter. So you just go into the filter and clear the filter. What we can do is within the filter, every one of these filters that we have applied in the table is applied within the table. We can either sort on that, ascending, descending, or we have other options. We can select an item. We can select the item, or we can select all, or we can filter by color. Or we can put logical, we're back to the logical stuff again, things like begins with, does not begin with, ends with, does not end with, equal to, not equal to, contains, does not contain. So these are all things we can, there's a bit of programmability in as we set up these filters, and we're working with the filters that we can, we have the capability of tapping into. All right. So, and that's really what this, kind of the application of this. We can apply a filter. We can make adjustments to the filter that's, on that particular, that's assigned for each of these columns. And what we can also do, we have an advanced filter. feature. So advanced filter, let's take a look where that's at. So advanced filter is another type of filter, okay, another application of a filter, all right? And where we see this at is, as we kind of come through, let's see, it's under, I believe we're going to find this under data. Let's see, and data is, no, it's not it. It is in, oh, here it is. It is here, sorry. It's on the, so this is, so where we work with the filters, filters deal with data. So we find it in the data, on the data tab on the ribbon, all right? And we have a filter, all right? And in addition, we also have what we call an advanced filter, all right? And what an advanced filter lets us do is to create a, let's clear that out. What we can apply is we can create a, within the worksheet itself, we can create a separate area where we can enter our criteria. Okay, so let me move some stuff down here just a little bit, give you a picture of how this gets set up. All right, so I'm just going to insert a bunch of blank lines here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my advanced filter. So let me go into the table. No, let me do my advanced filter. So my advanced filter, if I click the advanced filter, what it will do is it'll first ask, you know, we can filter the data that's in place as it exists. All right, or I can copy it to another location. All right, so I'm actually, say my list range is going to be, see if that works. Let's see, table, I believe if I type in table 1, that's my list range. All right, and then my criteria range is going to be, I'm going to take, actually, let me do this first before I do that one thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this first, I'll take my columns here, my column headers. We'll do a Control C to copy it. Paste this up here. All right. And then what I am going to do is I am then going to apply my advanced filter. And my advanced filter will be, you know, the, so you have to put the list range, which will define your table. I think I can put table 1 in for my range. And my criteria range is going to be the first 2 columns up here, or first 2 rows. All right. So what it'll be is it'll sheet 1, and it'll be a fixed address. It'll be A1 through E2. All right. So what will happen is the way this will be represented will be, the way this will be represented, it'll show up as a column, the column name, and then I can enter data beneath it. All right, so if I do an OK on this, all right, so what I'll have now is with this advanced filter, I can enter data here. My selection criteria is here, and it'll apply the filter. All right, and I can, you know, I can go back and I can find these. You know, the advanced filter will. Now, what you can do, one of the things you'll find is with the advanced filter is, you know, if you only have, you know, if you're going to put more than one criteria. So if I want to say coffee, on my filter, All right. What would happen? What I need to coffee and tea. If I want to put coffee and tea in for my filter. All right. What I'd have to do is I would have to adjust my advanced filter so my criteria range would now become, no, hang on. Would then become it would then become this. All right, which will allow me to have more than one. So it'll look at whatever this range, whatever it's in my criteria range, and apply it against whatever I have in my list range. All right, so that's this. So that's what we call the advanced filter. All right, so that's a feature that's built into Excel. So I can enter multiple criteria, and it'll apply that, to the data we have below. Okay, so we say, row 1 contains the field headings that match the column headings and, below. And then row 2 contains 3. And if I wanted to have multiples, if I wanted to have multiple criteria, I would expand my range for that. Okay. We've talked a bit about slicers, kind of filters. It's another application of filtering. What it'll do is it'll take a look at each of the columns I create a slicer on. I create a slicer per column. I can have as many as one column, one slicer per column. And what I can do is it will look through and find all of the unique values that are out there. And then what I can do is by clicking that, it will filter, it will activate the filter and clear and only present what I show. Okay. So it's just a different kind of different ways of leveraging this filtering capability. And we have an example here. This is kind of an example of a subtotal, kind of combined with subtotaling. So by combining all these things together, all right, we can consolidate data. We can take a whole range of data and be able to do a whole bunch of analysis to this data. All right, which is pretty, it's pretty powerful mechanisms. Right, so this is all built into Excel. All right, so these are, so the idea of what this gives us the ability to do is this stuff is, adds a database-like capability to Excel. It doesn't make Excel a database, but it will, we can use a kind of turn it in or add application functionality or database-like functionality into it. So what we do is we create an Excel. We take a range of data, we turn it into a table. We create a named range for the entire table. All right. We can set up a row for criteria selection, and then we can use the appropriate arguments, to be able to find things out there. So that's really so we can do, that's what we call this, this idea of, kind of a database function, inside of Excel. But we've got more stuff. So we actually have more stuff that goes into that we can leverage in Excel. Most notably, what we call the pivot table. All right. So what a pivot table is, it gives us the ability to kind of build upon what we have with filters and table functionality, and it gives us the ability to really create what we call an interactive table that we can look at data and the relationships of data in different fashions. All right, both in the horizontal and vertical. All right, so we can do some really neat stuff. So it's a very powerful function. All right, so let's take a look at our how we would go about this. All right, so if we look at our worksheet here, I think let me look at another one here. All right. All right, so I have some examples. So this is actually an example here. I think I had posted. I'll double check. I think I posted this out there. This is an example of a pivot table. All right, and what it has in it. So this is our this is our documentation page. What kind of explains it. This is provided by Microsoft. So this is an example of a simple example of a pivot table that was built by Microsoft to use as a demonstration. So that's kind of the source of this. So what we have is a couple things. So we have is within this we have source data. All right. And actually what I've done is I've gone back and I've created multiple source data on this. This is our source data. We have a pivot table structure. All right, which is, this is really the pivot table. So when we create this, this is the pivot table starter. And this is the sample pivot table. All right, so if I don't have anything in this, actually I should probably walk through it. So what'll happen is it'll go through all the data in my table, and we'll create this little structure right here. So this structure right here is what we call the field list. All right, now what happens is a pivot table is another type of Excel object. So as we've learned, if I have an Excel object and what I want to do is I want to do stuff with that object. If I have an object on my worksheet and I click on it, it will Excel will recognize what it is and will pop up some special entries on the ribbon that has the functionality to enable us to do stuff with the pivot table. All right, so this is the by default by creating a pivot. So and actually what I can do is very simple. To create a pivot table, to go source data, what I'll do is I'm going to go my project. Give you an example. I have a table here. This is a table. This is, I believe, I call this one source data 55. All right. And so what it is, it was data that I turned into a table. All right. So what I want to do is I want to turn this into a pivot table. All right. This is a regular table, and I'm going to turn it into a pivot table. So what I do is I go up here and go to my insert. All right. And what I have is the first entries on this. I can either insert a table, which we've looked at before, but I can insert a pivot table, or I can let Excel take a look at what I want to do and turn it into a pivot table. Now what will happen is by default, this is a very simple table, so it's whatever this would be. If I just take the default, it's just going to present the default. But if I have more sophisticated data, it can act. There's different ways I can create the tables, and it will give us a list of different alternative tables. All right. So what I did was I just simply said create a pivot table from that. I went to my source data, I selected it, created a pivot table, and now I have a pivot table. All right, from that table. All right. By default, and you'll see is this is actually, if I click onto this table, the pivot table name, this is pivot table, let's see if this is the same one. Oh, pivot table 1, yeah. So the previous one I had out there was called pivot table report, and then sample report 1, and then this third one I just created really out of just clicking it, is called pivot table 1. All right, it's a default name. And by default, what will happen is I will it will create this little table, and will give me a list of all the fields. All right, so I've got a whole amount and timeline. If I unclick everything, there I don't show anything. All right, so what I can do is I come over here. If I want to show something on a report, I can click the different elements on the report. So what I have is I have customers. I can add the year. I can add the amount. I can add the timeline. All right, so I can do it, and then what I can do, so that's what I can show. But then what I can also do is I can add so I'm listing everything out by customers. But if I want to see product by customer, I have customer up right now. If I do a product, you'll see it now gave me a breakdown of of products within each customer. All right. And if I flip this around, I can move this below and it'll change it. Now I have a list of all of my products and the matching customers who, if I have more than one customer, I should. And I can move these around. I can make the columns, I can make the rows. I can take the values out. And as you'll see, as I move these things, and I can apply filters as well. All right. And in addition, I can also add slicers. As we talk about adding a slicer, so I can add a slicer. We'll say add a slicer for the customer. All right. So it looked through my entries, and if I click that, you'll see it. I'll get my individual. We'll get our individual. Our data will be filtered out. That's what the slicer does for us. All right. I can also come up here. I can also change the layout. So this is if I click into the table, I can go to my pivot table, analyze. So that's my analyze. I can also change the design. So if I want to make it green, now it's green. And I have a whole bunch of these things we can do. So we don't lack for options on this. So we'll make it like yellow. So we can slice and dice by converting data. So what we do is we take data to a table, and then we take a table to a pivot table. Right? And when we create a pivot table, we can manipulate the structure of the pivot table. We can manipulate it dynamically. All right. So it'll do all the stuff for us. So this gives us adds a very database-like capability into Excel. All right. So just kind of walking through the slides here. First decision: where do we want to put it? Do we want to put it onto the exact same, put it into the same worksheet, or do we want to create a new worksheet? All right. And then figure out what our styles are, and then what type of summarizations we want to do. So we can add subtotals. We can do all of that stuff that we looked at previously, and add them into pivot tables. All right. So some of the recommendations, you want to use a good representation. You want to use something that describes what each field contains, the data each field contains, because that's what we're going to be using as we create this report. From the source data, what we want to do is we actually want to take, when we create the pivot table, we want to take subtotals out of the source data. All right, because then once we create the pivot tables, then we can leverage the subtotals into the pivot table. So we want the source data to be simple, and then the pivot table will have all of this capability within it. Okay. And then one of the other features of a pivot table is we can add variables. As we add columns into the pivot table, it will represent. So the pivot table and the source table that it's drawn from are, those are tied together. So as we change the pivot, so if we change the information in the source table, the pivot table, will carry that over. Now, sometimes you have to do a refresh of it. It may not happen automatically. Like if you make the changes, save it, reopen it, it will repopulate. If you make the changes dynamically, then what you will likely have to do is do a refresh to be able to move from the table, what mods you made on the table to the pivot table. Okay, but that's, works both ways. Okay. And as we said, this is our, we create the term we use around this. Actually, the term, so the formal term we see as we're looking at this is on these things. If I go to that table, if I click into the table, this is what is known as the context tab. All right, this is our context tab. So this pops up if I'm, I click into a table. As I click into that, I can either do a design, layouts, rows, and the actual report itself. Or kind of adding slicers, timelines. So timeline is just another reporting type of object, which will then it'll match up against it'll look at the data in the table, in the pivot table, and do give us a picture of kind of where things are at, the distribution of the data. And we can look at it by months, we can look at it by days, when are things occurring. So it'll look, here's 2021, 2022. All right. So we can get, a sense of, we have a bunch of different analytical tools we can bring into this report, and, look at it a number of different ways, which is, as I said before, you would actually have to move this to some type of database to be able to do a lot of this stuff. Now it's just built into the pivot table. So it's a very useful, it's another one of these type of functionality. If you learn this stuff and you get good at it, you become very popular. Right. Our pivot table fields, as we had explained, what will happen is this actually controls what the pivot report looks like. All right, so we can select what fields we want to display. All right, and then down here is where we control the kind of the layout of the report. So we can define, okay, what do I want to have as my rows? What do I want to have as my columns? All right, do I want to apply filters? All right. Yeah, so this gives us our we call the fields, the pivot table fields pane with field lists and field areas, and that's the formal title of that. But that's what this stuff is up here. So if I go into my table again, as I'm up here, if I'm in my analyze, what I can do is I can turn this on and off through the field list. If I turn the field list off, it goes away. I click it, it comes back. I can add buttons, and you can also do, work with field headers and things like that. You get a better sense of kind of what that does. So you have a fair amount of control of being able to move things around and construct the report that fits what you're trying to get. All right, so it's not, it doesn't have, it's really a matter of looking at what your data looks like, and then being able to leverage the functionality of the report on it and organize it the way you want to look at it. Okay. We can do group by options. A lot of capabilities. We can do, we can identify ranges of dates. If I want to do months, quarters, days. Grouping functionality, and apply, as we said, we can apply custom names. These are all kind of descriptions of the types of things how we can modify the report to give it we can modify it so it gives us, a better representation of what we're trying to get to. Right. So, for example, we can add a slicer to it and then we can, to filter out, like if I only want to, and what will happen is everything in this report, if I remove the slicer, I'll see all the detail. And then if I want to put a slicer on to be able to look at a particular employee, I have a list of all the employees. I select that employee, and this report will change and will only give me the relevant information for that employee. Okay, so once again, that's a pretty slick thing to do. Especially as you're analyzing data and you're kind of exploring data and kind of seeing what relationships are and how things are, and how things are if you're in like a discovery mode. All right. We can also do things like we can also do a drill down. We have the ability to, be able to, look at the data, the underlying data that we summarize in the pivot table. Since it's the pivot table and the source table are combined, we can go back and we can actually do a drill through. We call a drill down or drill through from a data, from a particular, some data to what makes up that field, what makes up that number. Okay, and this whole idea of refreshing is what we'll do is it'll go back out to the source data. Take a snapshot, come back and update the data that's in the pivot table. So you can add data, add fields, add whatever you're inclined, you want to do, and then do a refresh, and your pivot table will be updated with all that information. Right now, what we call just to wrap up here, we also have something we call pivot charts. All right, so what a pivot chart is a representation of pivot data. All right. So as we talked about, having a worksheet. We have the data in a worksheet, and we have, a charts that we can, apply to that data to be able to do a visualization of the data. Pivot charts are the same thing. They're with the same capabilities. They link. A pivot table is linked to the pivot chart. All right. One thing that's interesting, or one thing that to look at, is the pivot chart. The expectation is we really want to have one pivot chart for a pivot table. All right, because what will happen is as you're changing the dynamics, as you're changing the values in the chart, or in the table, in the pivot table, the chart will also dynamically reflect that. Okay, so really, you don't want to create a bunch of tables. You don't want to create a bunch of charts, because what will happen is every time you change the data in it, it will get, it will follow along. So really the best practice, is you have a relationship of one pivot table with a chart 1-to-1 relationship between pivot table and chart. And in a lot of ways, what we had talked about with, creating charts, arranging source data, column headers, representing each field, row headers, representing each record. All right, kind of, as we try to create what a chart would look like, and then what we would want to do in terms of, grouping and summarization of the data. Are there things we want to apply to add a structure to the data that we would leverage in our reporting, that we also would want to visualize. So, a lot of the stuff in the design units, you do it a couple times, you get a couple, you get practice with it, and you kind of can get an idea of, what would be a good working way to create how you want to get your pivot chart to be, representative, tell the story you wanted to tell. Remember, a lot of this stuff is all built around is the ability to tell a story. All right. So, so things we want to think about is, well, who's the audience? And what's the information we want that is most relevant? How much detail that they have to, not every audience wants to see, infinite levels of details. Executive levels are usually focused on higher level trends, directions, things of that nature, with the ability to kind of see what the the data is behind the scenes. Whereas operational folks, a lot of times, will want to see, they'll kind of work their way up. They're not be looking at the big picture. They're going to be looking at, okay, what's, the details of what's happening to us right, particular thing. So the idea is trying to, kind of leveraging this stuff, figuring out, who your audience is, what information we want to include, and really what is the formatting that best suits the story we want to tell. Okay. So just an example of, a picture of our, pivot table here. So there's our pivot, our pivot chart. We can add fields to the pivot chart. And, so it has a similar kind of functionality. We have different chart types. So if we look at our, if we take a look at the pivot chart types, pivot chart, we have a chart field list sets, design. We have different chart types, formats, chart elements, chart types. So all the stuff we saw with charts, we can make it a pie chart, 3D pie chart. So all that would, so that, it's not that we don't lack for different options. It's really the exercise becomes one of understanding what we want, what the story we want to tell, what is the appropriate way to be able to tell the story, and to leverage the right visualization and the right representation to be able to be able to do that. So, quick summary. We talked about the idea of Excel tables, and one of our is the ability. We can take a data on a worksheet and enhance it. In effect, we add information, organization, and analytical capability. So we can add, representation, visual representation, bands and colors and stuff. It adds filters that we can then leverage to, analyze data or filter data or sort data. It takes the columns names, which are, just on a regular worksheet is just simply a row of data that actually will assign that data, make it persistent, and assign it to the tables. And actually, we'll always see it. As you scroll through it, the column names will always be there. And then we can add totals, on each column to do quick analysis. We can use it as a simple database. Right? It's not a big database. It's not as full function, but we can do a lot of stuff. The idea of we can create a single table database with the ability to do all sorts of lookups and analysis of the data. So each column is a field, each row is a record, and we can aggregate and retrieve data in a fashion similar to what we do with databases. Right. And then finally, we talked about pivot tables, which is really an even more sophisticated, application of the filtering and table functionality that's in there. So it's an it's an interactive table, drawn from a data source. All right, and it gives us the ability to automatically aggregate and display results, and we can actually dynamically create a report, across different types of across hierarchies of data, and so it's, as I said, a very powerful mechanism. And then pivot charts is really the chart counterpart. We saw charts with our regular worksheets. A pivot chart is a graphical representation of the data that's in the pivot table. All right, and has a lot of the same. It has a lot of the same capabilities we see with our regular charts, but the other thing, the important thing is it's tied to the pivot table. So we have it shares the filtering capability, to be able to drill into data, and be able to have the representation of the data, the graphical representation of the data, kind of follow along. So. All right, so that is everything we need to know for Chapter 6 and everything dealing with kind of data and some of the data sophistication and some of the sophisticated data capabilities that we see inside of Excel.